Hello everybody, I first got the idea to this video around 2020, but then life happened and I only have two hands which to fulfill all my creative ideas. You all know that shoegaze is quite literally my life. I'm from the Thames Valley where a lot of the original shoegaze music was made, and have since devoted my life to making shoegaze music with vile oscillation, releasing shoegaze films with pedal partners, and even putting out my very own shoegaze pedals. As a teen, however, I was obsessed with grunge. Nirvana was the only band I listened to for a 5-year period as a teenager, and it was even my name on like Facebook, and other kids was making fun of me and stuff, but yeah.
All the music you're going to hear in this film is original. Some of it is our song, some of it is just improvisation. So dive into our independent shoegaze bands, Abstract and Sound, and Vile Oscillation.
I also really started to get into musicology partly through Mark Yarm's Everybody Loves Our Town, a comprehensive look at the Seattle sound. And Mark Yarm, is he the same guy as Mark Yarm from Mudhoney? I don't think he is, but that's just suspiciously close. If you get one thing from this video, it's this: shoegaze and grunge are not the same thing, people. Being at the center of the shoegaze genre, one misconception we often see is a lot of modern alternative and grunge music being mistaken for shoegaze. I think a common cause of this is often music with distorted power chords is often getting misconstrued with the ethereal frequencies put out by MBV and co. So today I'm going to take a deep dive using my in-depth knowledge of shoegaze and my teenage obsession with grunge to compare and differentiate the two genres. Both shoegaze and grunge originated in very distinct geographical locations and within the same decade. Shoegaze emerged from the UK and Ireland, in particular a region in the UK known as the Thames Valley, in cities and towns such as Oxford, shout out to my hometown, London and Reading. Grunge meanwhile emerged from the US state of Washington, in particular from cities such as Seattle and Olympia. Two bands which were key to the development of shoegaze were Scotland's Cocteau Twins and Ireland's My Bloody Valentine. Cocteau Twins, who formed in 1979, represent the dreamier side of the shoegaze sound, presenting a sonic atmosphere that has become known as dream pop. Two key components of the band sound were Elizabeth Fraser's otherworldly vocals and Robin Guthrie's guitars. Elizabeth's vocals often incorporated foreign words she didn't even know the meaning of, and even esoteric vocalizations that were of no language. Robin Guthrie meanwhile made great use of guitar effects such as delay and chorus. My Bloody Valentine meanwhile emerged in 1980s Ireland, 83 to be precise. They started out as a gothic post-punk outfit, two genres that are part of shoegaze story, with bands such as Bauhaus, The Cure, The Smiths and Susie and the Banshees having a profound impact on some shoegaze bands. Releasing several EPs and a mini album in the mid to late 80s, it was with MBV's debut album Proper Isn't Anything that the band helped to pioneer the shoegaze genre. Utilising new methodologies such as Kevin Shields' glide guitar technique, the album would be followed up in 1991 by what many consider to be the pinnacle shoegaze album, Loveless, a guitar-drenched record that encapsulates the distorted reverberations of the shoegaze genre. Grunge, meanwhile, was inspired by the alternative rock of Sonic Youth, Mudhoney, Green River and Pixies, as well as the punk of Black Flag and Hüsker, the heavy metal of Black Sabbath and the sludge metal of Melvins. Nirvana took these sounds mainstream. Despite starting with very punk-infused ethos, Kurt Cobain and co weren't strangers to high-quality productions, such as 1991's Nevermind and 1993's Inertia. These albums contained a lot of common pop production techniques, such as vocal double-tracking and chorused guitars, which gave a more pristine sheen to the band's overall raw and energetic sound. Both shoegaze and grunge found bands lumped into scenes due to geographic proximity. For shoegaze, artists such as Swervedriver, who actually played something that was closer to 90s American alternative rock, found themselves labelled shoegaze due to their Oxford location and close proximity to a whole scene of shoegaze bands. The Thames Valley, the scene that celebrates itself, included pivotal shoegaze acts such as Slowdive, Chapterhouse and Lush. Originally, both the terms shoegaze and the scene that celebrates itself were coined as an insult to the genre by bored journalists, though in more recent times these have been turned on their head, with Gen Z finding refuge in the introspective and effects-laden music of the shoegaze genre. As to why these terms were first coined, shoegaze referred to the introverted nature of shoegaze musicians who stared at their pedal boards at shows. I've always thought pedal gaze or effects gaze to be more appropriate depictions of the genre, though the term was first coined by a music journalist, and it'd obviously be a bit of a stretch for a music journalist to know what a guitar pedal is. That would just be too much to ask. The scene that celebrates itself, meanwhile, described the tendency for local shoegaze bands to support each other at each other's shows, and also as the bands often shared members. Again, how this got spun to be a negative, I don't know, but don't put anything past the British press. Grunge was a Seattle-centric genre, which found it also being called the Seattle Sound. Once again, a diverse selection of bands were lumped into the genre due to their proximity to the Pacific Northwest. Bands such as Pearl Jam were labelled grunge despite being more influenced by classic rock bands such as Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones, in contrast to the heavy metal of Melvins and punk of Husker. As with shoegaze, there was a certain kinship between grunge musicians, with Melvins drummer Dale Crover playing on an original Nirvana demo tape, and Buzz from the Melvins even introducing Kurt Cobain to Dave Grohl. Sonically, there seems to be some confusion around how to differentiate between shoegaze and grunge, with both genres relying heavily on distortion. Whilst it is true distortion is a key part of both genres, you could say the same of many genres, with distortion being a staple of guitar music. Whilst grunge music primarily sticks to only 2 or 3 effects, like distortion, fuzz, and chorus for its sonic palette, within shoegaze, there is a far wider range of effects at play, reverb being one such effect. A hallmark of the genre is in fact the use of reverse reverb. Delay is another prominent effect utilised by shoegazers, often combined with modulation such as tremolo, phaser, flanger, and chorus. Unlike with the power chords of grunge, in shoegaze music frequencies are melded together with the use of glide guitar technique, with guitarists utilising whammy bars on Fender Jazzmasters to create warped soundscapes. Both shoegaze and grunge are guitar-centric, with the use of offset guitars being prominent in both genres. Kurt Cobain had his Jaguars and Mustangs, Kevin Shields had his Jazzmasters. And just to be different, I'm a shoegazer who plays a Kurt Cobain Jaguar. But that's about where the similarities end instrumentally. Shoegaze utilises alternate tunings, and when I'm playing shoegaze, I use a wider variety of chord voicings compared to the drop tunings and power chords of grunge. Alternate tunings refers to any tuning that alters the standard E, A, D, G, B, E arrangement on a guitar, whereas a drop tuning only lowers the lower string on a guitar, normally the low E string, with tunings such as drop D being more common in grunge. As such, shoegazers utilise tunings to alter the entire resonance of the music they're playing, whereas for grunge musicians, the purpose of drop tuning is to create a heavier sound. Vocals are not placed at the forefront within shoegaze, instead acting as another layer in an ocean of sound. Within grunge, vocals are used in a more traditional rock sense, being placed higher up in the mix. Shoegaze has a stronger representation across genders, with a strong female presence in bands such as Abstract in Sound. Literally the entire band is these wonderful girls called Paige and Becca, and other bands such as Slowdive, My Bloody Valentine, and Lush. In contrast, grunge was primarily a lads' game, with bands such as Nirvana, Alice in Chains, and Soundgarden being solely composed of males. The feminine touch is something I value highly here at Pedal Partners, the home of all things shoegaze. Shoegaze musicians such as Abstract in Sound's Paige and Becca have a unique creative touch that has really helped shape the shoegaze genre. The use of dreamlike imagery doused in our signature pink simply wouldn't exist without the girlies. Such gender representation within shoegaze opens up a broader palette of expression than was available to grunge bands, with unique female experiences and creativity opening up something new to the shoegaze genre. As a whole, shoegaze is a very open and fluid genre. To get a concise overview of each genre, let's take a look at two fundamental bands from each. Slowdive Savlaki represents the dreamier side of shoegaze, with layered guitar parts cascading off relaxed drum parts, delay and modulation effects a key part of affairs. Released in 1993, the album remains a cornerstone of the shoegaze genre. My Bloody Valentine's Loveless represents the heavier, noise-driven side of the shoegaze genre, with a revolutionary approach taken with the use of a unique guitar technique known as glide guitar. For grunge, Nirvana's debut album Bleach found the band fusing punk and metal elements into a kind of proto-grunge sound. Songs such as Blue and School cut a raw and ready sound, whilst in complete contrast the track About a Girl pays homage to Kurt Cobain's love of the Beatles and R.E.M. Soundgarden's 1994 effort Super Unknown presents an evolved version of the Seattle band, with heavy guitar riffs juxtaposed by Chris Cornell's tenor vocals. In contrast to the heavy use of rhythm guitars in shoegaze, lead guitars play a foundational part of this grunge album. Both shoegaze and grunge had a profound impact on guitar music. Grunge has really played a key part in guitar music since its heyday in the 90s, with the guitar music of the 2000s and 2010s paying strong homage to the genre. At one point, it was difficult to find a band that didn't reference Nirvana as an inspiration, the band pretty much being the Beatles of their generation. Meanwhile, shoegaze faded into obscurity for much of the 2000s, with the emergence of grunge in the US and Britpop in the UK, signalling the genre's apparent demise. Whilst there was a small shoegaze resurgence with the emergence of the genre new gaze, shoegaze proper really started to gain traction in the 2010s, with the re-emergence of bands such as Slowdive, MBV and Ride. The genre has found strong popularity in the last couple of years, especially amongst Gen Z. If you want to support the channel, I appreciate it. We start from nothing, start out of our rooms, and here we are. We're fully independent. We're proud of that fact.